Ooh. What's up? You ready for this? Good. So am I. Welcome back to another one, guys. My name is Braden, and I'm an artist. We're going to be using a reference photo for this one. Now, as you can see, this reference is a profile angle, right? So we're going to be using this reference photo, and I'm going to be showing you how you can leverage the Loomis method with a little bit of the Asaro method as well, and just kind of sketching it all out and having fun with it. Now, I will say, if you find yourself enjoying this video, then I know for a fact that you would thoroughly enjoy my Skillshare classes. Skillshare is a little different from YouTube. The classes are a lot more formal, they're slowed down, and at the end of them, you can upload a project and I can give you my feedback on them. I do have a link in the description of this video. If that's something that you want to check out, I'd love to see you there. So, what to expect? In this one, I'm going to be taking you through, and I'm going to show you how you can start to draw this portrait by drawing a simple circle. Once that circle is drawn in, then I'm going to show you how you can sketch in your side plane. Once the side plane is sketched in, then I'm going to show you how you can use the angle of the eyes to draw your horizontal axis, from there extending that line over so that you have a brow line. Once the brow line is placed, then I'm going to show you how you can identify where the bottom of the nose sits. Once that's drawn in, I'm going to show you how you can draw out the edge of the Loomis head so that you can start to manipulate that Loomis head and essentially kind of carve out your portrait. That's pretty much the hard part. Once all of that is drawn in, then it's actually very, very simple to place the features and then start to build up those lower values and bring out that underlying form. It's imperative that you don't worry about details at first, because those come later. So having said that, make sure that you like, make sure that you subscribe, and then turn on all of your notifications so that you never miss when my latest and greatest videos hit the channel here at Messer Creations. That's it. Let's hit it. All right, so first things first, we're going to refer to our reference photo. We're going to straighten our back. We're going to straighten our wrist. We're going to kick our pinky out. And we're just going to go in a circle over and over again. The trick with drawing a circle is that the movement is not in your wrist. It's in your elbow. So once we have a rough circle, then we're going to identify the side plane here. Okay. This is the oval on the side of our Loomis head. And then we're going to look at the angle of the eye. This is our side plane here. And then I like to draw a little line to signify the temple plane. And then we're just going to pull our brow line over like this. Okay. Now that we have that established, I want to extend from the bottom of the oval over, and that is going to signify the bottom of the nose. Okay. And then just roughly we're going to draw out the edge of our Loomis head. And given that our reference photo has sort of a rounded chin, we can start to draw that in. This right here is the vertical axis. Now the bottom of the vertical axis plugs in to the bottom of the earlobe. So we'll just sketch in a rough plain ear. And then right here where the jaw plugs in to the skull, we're just going to pull that over. Okay. And then what we can do is right about where that temple plane is, we pull down from our brow line, and that gives us the edge of the eye socket. And then from the bottom of that, we can pull this over. And that gives us a rough guesstimate of where the bottom of the eye is going to sit. Now, we have an angle, something like this, and I'm just going to very, very lightly insert a value plane here, right? And then here is the plane of the nose. And what I'm practicing right here is a rough sketch of what the Asaro planes look like for the nose. Now, Asaro planes are important to understand, especially if you have never heard of them. Effectively, they were created by John Asaro in California in the mid-1970s, and he designed them more for painters. But because graphite and charcoal artists are very, very similar to painters in that they're both visual artists, we can get away with using them for our own sketches. But the reason why they're important is because they show you the value planes of a face when it comes to how the light is cast upon the face. So you can actually use the planes as a basis for your features to come. And then, of course, just like I'm doing here, you can insert the nostril. You can start to establish the outside edges of the nose. Okay. But those planes are very crucial to take that next step from the Loomis method, which is pretty much the foundation of your portrait, and kind of take it to that next step. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm just establishing the outside edge of the forehead and the nose. And I'm using a very, very light pressure control as well. That way, if I need to go back and retrieve any high values, I can do that. Okay. But just notice how I'm using the overhand method here. And I'm just very lightly going in and I'm drawing rough, light rhythm lines. Okay. And then here I'm using the outside of the tip of the nose as a basis for my lips. And then right about here I'm using the edge of the nose where it plugs into the face as a reference point for right about where the corner of my mouth would be. And now here I'm establishing the upper lip. Now the trick with lips is you want to start very, very light. Do not, whatever you do, go in with a heavy hand with a very, very heavy pressure control and establish those lines, because then they're going to look wooden and they're not going to look realistic. Okay. You can always build your lines up by going over them again and again, especially if you're sketching with a graphite pencil like I am. Okay. The big thing that I want to show you with this, guys, is that the Loomis head is not everything. It's just meant to be that foundation, that basis that you can use for everything else. So right there, notice how I used the inside of my eye socket as a reference point, then I pulled down and I was able to establish the front of the subject's throat. That's what we want. And now, here what I'm going to do is I'm not going to get too carried away with the hair right now, but I do want to kind of establish the edge of the hair, because what that will do is that will help me rein in my proportions for the rest of the face. Now, when it comes to portraits, there are three main angles that you will work with more often than not. There are extreme angles like people looking up, drawing the back of someone's head looking away, but for the most part, you will draw front-facing angles. You'll draw 3/4 turn angles, whether they be left or right, and you will draw what are called profile portraits. This portrait is a profile portrait. Now, see how I sketched in the eyebrow right on top of the brow line, right? That's why the brow line in the Loomis head extending from the horizontal axis line is so important, because it helps us identify exactly where we need to place that eyebrow. Okay. And then here, I'm using the overhand method to sketch in my eye, but if you feel more comfortable, most beginning artists do, and you want to use the 3-point method, which is how they teach us to write in school, go right ahead. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is how comfortable you feel at that moment in time. Technique comes with time, and using technique to where it actually is comfortable is just muscle memory. Remember what I said in the last tutorial. In order to build sufficient muscle memory, you have to go through anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 repetitions. And this goes for anything, whether you're learning how to drive a stick shift in a car, or you're drawing, or you're learning how to fold clothes a certain way, right? 3,000 to 5,000 repetitions. So just be aware of that. So now that I have this established, I'm just drawing out the eyelashes. And I'm using a very, very light hand. Okay. Now these lines that I'm putting in, they have a fairly thin line quality. And then of course I can always go back in and I can make those lines appear darker, which essentially will define the line even more. And because they are darker, that weight of that line will get ever more heavy, okay? But always start off light and build up to it, work your way up to it. And here we have a little skin crease. And then also, when you look at the reference, notice how there are different variations in value within the face. Now, every face is going to be different, but you can go in and you can start to hatch or cross hatch if you want to, and you can really start to bring out character. Now, I will caution you, try to keep yourself from doing that, right? Make sure you establish that the proportions are where you want them. And then once you know that, okay, cool, I like that, then you can move on and you can really start to add in the detail. It's that ancient fight between artists and their art, especially when it comes to recreating something, like a client or a photograph. Those proportions will get you. But I like to think that in drawing, there's no such thing as accidents. There's only adjustments, right? Just adjust, just like life. Something goes sideways in life, you have the ability to adjust and not let it eat you up. It's the same thing. Everything in life is a choice. With art, because art is a part of life, it's the exact same thing. Just choose to always be evolving and always be learning. And you will. Okay, so this is slowly but surely starting to come together. Now, notice how I erased that harsh line, and now I'm kind of kicking this out and being a little bit softer with it. Okay. Now for this one, what I'm going to start establishing here is these are the Asaro planes. Now, you could think of these as rhythm lines if you want to. They're not really rhythm lines so much as they are identifying those planes within the face. You could think of them as hybrid rhythm lines if you want to. Rhythm lines were really brought into the light by the Riley method. Now, the Riley method, pretty much established what rhythm lines are. And the Loomis method does use some rhythm lines, but the Riley method was the one that really brought them into prominence. But what I'm just doing here is I'm using my Asaro model that I have in my studio as I draw this reference photo, and I'm using it as a reference point so that I can start to really understand these planes, right? Because every angle that you work with, whether it's a profile angle such as this, or it's a straight on angle, a 3/4 turn angle, those planes will vary. They'll vary in length. They'll vary in magnitude as far as how many planes you want to put on your drawing. It's the perfect practice when you think about it. But now what I'm doing is I'm feeling pretty comfortable with where these proportions are as far as the bottom of the nose, and then my lips and my chin. So now I'm going in and I'm beefing up my lines. Notice how these lines here, they're getting a thicker quality. They have a heavier weight to them now. Now, another trick with line work. A lot of young artists will make this mistake, but they'll go in and they'll put the same quality, the same weight on the same defined lines throughout their drawing. And that's fine if that's the aesthetic that you're going for. But if you want it to look a little bit more realistic, one of the tricks is that you want to have a massive variance between your thinnest quality lines and your thickest quality lines. And you also want to have a variation in your line weights as well. Now, I've mentioned this in other tutorials. 9 times out of 10, there is this correlation between a line's quality and a line's weight. Typically, not all the time, but typically if a line is thicker, that line will hold a heavier line weight, meaning that it's darker, right? Now, if it's thinner, it will tend to have a lighter line weight, or it will not be as dark, okay? So just keep that in mind. Now what I'm doing is I'm going through, and this subject has a lot of hair, and so we're going to work on that. I love curly hair. I think it's got so much character, and it's a lot of fun to draw. And this one's kind of interesting. I'm going to switch from the 3-point method to the overhand method here. That's another thing that you can start to work on as well. Like as you're going through and sketching with me, like jump back and forth. You let your hand feel what you like, and more importantly, what you don't like, right? So if you're in a 3-point drawing stance, right, with your hand, and then all of a sudden you want to switch to the overhand method and vice versa, let your hand do that. Record yourself drawing, and then go back and watch how you draw, watch your techniques, watch what you do, watch what you don't do, and you can make adjustments going into your next drawing. But notice how the more time I spend on this hair, that value continues to lower, right? And then we can just go in like here, and we can lower this value as well. And this is one of the fascinating things about sketching like this, guys, is the details are ever evolving, right? They're constantly coming out. And the one thing that I will say, whenever you're building up your values or your details, is look at the subtleties of your reference photo, right? There is an underlying flow, or what I like to call an underlying form, in every single portrait that you will draw. And when you're hatching, like say like this, for example, notice the direction that I'm pulling the pencil across the paper, right? Like here, for example, I'm going to establish an Asaro plane at the corner of the brow and then at the top of the nose bridge. And those are subtle. You don't have to put those Asaro planes in there if you don't want to. But I will say that it is good to have a solid understanding. If you study anything in portraiture, study Loomis, study Asaro, and study Riley. If you understand those three principal methods for drawing portraits, you will be ahead of the rest. Those three artists really paved the way for portrait artists of all kinds, whether you paint, charcoal, graphite, watercolor, whatever, because they are principal approaches and understandings to establishing the framework that you need for most any portrait. And then here, notice this chin. This is interesting. There's multiple planes. So you have the plane where the light is casting. Then you have a very low value plane immediately underneath where the light is not casting. And then it goes back to a higher value on the throat. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to continue to build these up. And that is very much what we're doing here, is I'm just building these up. Notice the direction. See the direction that I'm pulling? You can either pull from the top down to the chin, or you can pull from the bottom up from the chin. It's really up to you. The biggest thing with this, especially if you're drawing with a mechanical pencil like I am, is just go nice and light, okay? Nice and light. You can always add more graphite. Kind of like how in some of my step-by-step drawing tutorials I say you can always add more charcoal. It's the exact same thing. You just don't want to add too much. Now we do have erasers, you can always retrieve high values if need be, but that's kind of a worst case scenario. Okay. Now, basically, I don't really like this. I'm looking at this again, and I need to bring this nose in, okay? Now, this is a prime example of making an adjustment, right? I've used the analogy when it comes to drawing before with that of dancing. Most people, when they dance, they mess up. They'll misstep, right? Or their partner will misstep. And that's fine, because you can always adjust and you keep going. Right? Drawing's very much the same way. Just because something didn't pan out the first go doesn't mean that you won't nail it the second go or the third go. Give yourself some grace, right? Drawing, expressing yourself on paper such as this should be a very enjoyable venture, right? It should be something that you look forward to, not something that you stress out about. But now that we have that drawn in, I like that a lot more. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start drawing in more of the hair, and we're pretty much at the step where I can really start to build up my mid and my lower values. Okay, this one's coming along quite nicely, but just notice the graphite on paper. Notice the planes and the direction that I'm pulling. And I will say that I'm going extremely light, okay? Very, very light. Another thing that I want you to be aware of is the overhand method, like what I'm doing right now. I would tell you that if you are at this phase in your drawing, use the overhand method over the 3-point method, because it forces your hand to use a lighter pressure control. Okay. Now notice this. Notice how I've switched to the 3-point method, right? That is because I want to use a heavier pressure control, and I want to build up my lower values a little faster. Now, for me personally, when I am drawing, I have noticed that when I use the 3-point method, I tend to push a little harder on the paper naturally. Versus when I switch to the overhand method, I tend to use an actual lighter pressure control. Now, everyone's different. You might be the exact opposite. But my challenge to you is to try it. Try both, and try them over and over and over again. And eventually, you'll find out exactly what works for you. Okay. yeah, we're just going to continue to build this up. And now let's put in some details. Let's add some character to our drawing here. Make him look a little bit more like the reference photo. Now, I will say, the more detail that you add to your drawing, the more realistic it will look, right? This is just a quick sketch on my side of it, but I'm hoping that by watching me draw and explain my process, how I'm thinking about this stuff, that it will help you guys to elevate your drawings and maybe learn one or two things. But the biggest thing that I will say is draw like there's no tomorrow. Just draw, and draw some more. And say, for example, in your sketchbooks, one of the things that I do is I'll go through with a reference photo and I'll just draw the Loomis head, and then I'll stop. The next reference, I'll draw a Loomis head with the eye planes established, and then I'll stop. It's not necessarily about drawing sketches to completion. It's about muscle memory and learning. Like you think about when you go to the gym, right? Do you go to the gym and do, upper body, core, and lower body all in the same day? I mean, I'm sure you probably could, but isn't it more beneficial to focus just on upper for one day, just on core for another day, just on your legs for another day? Use that same approach to your drawings, and I guarantee you that they will get better, right? Dedicate entire days to just sketching out hair. Dedicate entire days to just sketching out eyes. And then when you sit down to do it all at once, everything will fuse into a beautiful drawing for you. There's only the action of drawing. There's nothing outside of that. Not for the artist. For viewers, absolutely. People that consume your art, of course, but not for you. Because drawing is what makes you happy. Drawing is what fulfills you. And that's okay. Yeah, here, got some light cast here. Try to build up this nose a little bit more. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. If you liked this video, then I know for a fact that you'll enjoy my Skillshare classes. I got a bunch of classes dedicated to drawing portraits from the ground up. I'll have the link to that in the description of this video. Also, I would love your support on Patreon. I do offer one-on-one drawing consultations. I'll have a link to my Patreon in the description of this video as well. And stay happy, stay healthy, and remember, never stop drawing.